Page 381 continued. Prose. Max Beerbohm, Beerbohm, 1872 to 1956, is a distinguished writer. His essays appeared in the works of Max Beerbohm, 1896, More, M-O-R-E, 1899, and Even Now, 1920, and his broadcast talks were published as Mainly on the Air, 1946. A.C. Ward writes about his achievement as an essayist. Cologne quote, Max Beerbohm brushes lightly, delicately, wiltily, I think it should be wittily, over the surface of life, with great tenderness for all that he has enjoyed, and unfailing humor, In his observations and in his style, there's nothing too much, but there's always just enough, unquote, para. Lord Bertrand Russell, 1872 to 1970, an outstanding thinker and philosopher, authored a number of works which are remarkable for great literary worth, eloquent, clear, and scholarly style. His works are The Philosophy of Leibniz, Leibniz, 1900, Principles of Social Reconstruction, 1917, Mysticism and Logic, 1918, The Analysis of Mind, 1921, An Outline of Philosophy, Marriage and Morals, 1929, The Conquest of Happiness, 1930, The Scientific Outlook, 1931, History of Western Philosophy, 1946, and Authority and the Individual, 1949. Para. T.S. Eliot, a poet-critic, wrote many critical works in compact, precise, and lucid style. C.E.M. Joad's 1891 to 1953, The Present and Future of Religion, 1936, and Good and Evil, 1943, and George Orwell's Inside the Well, 1940, Critical Essays, 1946, and Shooting an Elephant, 1950, are memorable works. Para. The essays of today. It is difficult to say what the future of the English essay is going to be. Men are not wanting who harbor the apprehension that the vogue of the short story and the one-act play will oust it from popular regard. No such disaster need be expected or anticipated. The opening for this kind of work are increasingly numerous, and the essay more than holds its own even today. In the 20th century, the writers of familiar essays, to say nothing of other kinds, have been so many that it is a difficult task to particularize them in this brief survey of the growth and development of this form of literary writing. Such an attempt is, moreover, unnecessary. Most of these essays are in the right line of descent, so far as method and style are concerned, from Lamb. The best of this group are probably E.V. Lucas, Robert Lind, G.K. Chesterton, Augustine Birrell, and A.G. Gardiner, Alpha of the Plough, Perhaps the only contemporary essayist who has a marked individuality of his own is Max Beerbohm. This writer commenced his career as one of the mannered stylists of the 1890s. In his later development, however, he has seemed to strike an entirely individual note. His style is characterized by greater incisiveness and astringency than that of most of the familiar essayists, and his choice of subjects is much more original and individualistic. Para. Essentials of the modern essay. The essay of today is more akin to conversation or letter writing than to the treatise. Henley, Henley, hits it off very well when he speaks of it as conversational literature. Even the style must be something midway between talking and writing. It is clear then that the success of an essay is dependent upon the body and mind of its author. The expression of personality is the most important factor. This too accounts for the dictum that the modern essay is the mirror of the best conversation. Page 382. The journals being the vehicle of the essay at present, the essayist has to express himself in a popular manner. Para. Ward has called the modern age the, quote, age of interrogation, unquote, stop. Quote, the old certainties, comma, unquote, he says, quote, are no longer certainties, stop. Everything is held upon to question, comma, everything from the nature of the deity to the construction of verse form, stop, unquote. Quote, the spirit of the age of interrogation, comma, unquote, he says further, quote, is seen in the questioning of the accepted form of the novel by James Joyce, Dorothy Richardson, and others, in the verse experiments of the Sitwells, in the biographical method of Lytton Strachey, as much as in the challenging ideas of Shaw and Wells, stop, unquote. The greatest writers of the modern age have chosen the essay as the medium for expressing their personal observations. They have a lot of life around them, and this very life they have sought to interpret in a way which cannot but engross the reader's attention. Personality has, in consequence, come to the forefront. A typical essay of the present day lays bare the inmost recesses of the writer's heart. Egotism is the keynote of the modern essay. The modern English essayist, it has been said, comma, quote, chooses to indicate all the contours of his individuality, comma, records his changes of equilibrium like the needle of seismograph, comma, and indulges in exchange for epigram, comma, that elusive quality also English, comma, known as humor, stop. No unquote sign, para. The present-day essayist is primarily concerned with life, the various aspects of life and the problems peculiar to them. He is above all an interpreter and critic of life. With a sympathetic heart and charming style, his criticism of life is bound to make it lovable. As a critic of life, the essay writer considers all its aspects and deals with them from a personal point of view. He ignores all existing ideas of relative values and sets aside already formed notions of what is good and great. His chief concern is the revelations of his own soul. Since literature is but an expression of life, the writer of essays is concerned with literary problems as well. Para. Another remarkable feature of the essay of today is its freshness and unsophisticated beauty. The writer presents his subject to his readers with a touch of lyric grace. Subjectivity is more prominent in the essays of today than in those of the past. They are therefore akin to lyric poetry of the highest order. Set formulae are cast to the winds. There is less of restraint and more of freedom. Artlessness is practiced with the result that the modern essay embraces a much wider variety of subjects and is more entertaining than its counterpart in the past. Para. As for style, it is that of everyday speech. Simplicity in word and phrase is the ideal. There is no attempt at obscurity or elusiveness. The triumph of modern English prose consists in the skillful use of the short sentence. In the main, the old writers prefer the more elaborate mode of expression. The essay writer of today does not believe in using the steamroller for the purpose of crushing a gnat, G-N-A-T. This does not mean that he is less forceful or effective on that account. Para. The innumerable daily papers and weekly and monthly periodicals of our own time afford almost unlimited scope for the essayist. Many of the contributions we usually call, quote, articles, unquote, could equally well be described as essays and are often collected and published in book form under that title. It would scarcely be possible to draw a line between the two, except to make the rough generalization that an essay is usually on a less ephemeral topic, more literary in style and of a more personal nature. It would also be difficult to divide modern English writers into personal and objective essayists, for many of them could be held to belong to both groups. Nevertheless, one might say that the objective critics would include Edmund Gosse, G-O-S-S-E, W.P. Carr, K-E-R, Andrew Lang, L-A-N-G, Lascelles, Lascelles, Abercrombie, Virginia Woolf, and Sir A. Quiller, Quiller, Couch, Couch, and among the living, Desmond McCarthy, T.S. Eliot, Aldous Huxley, E.M. Forster, and Charles Morgan. Among the essayists whose own personality is brought into the foreground, one would rank G.K. Chesterton, E.V. Lucas, A.G. Gardiner, Robert Lind, Hilaire Belloc, Sir Max Beerbohm, and J.B. Priestley. Section: Contemporary Age in an Era of Prose and Journalism. The best prose of the 20th century has gone into the novel and drama. With the close of the 19th century, the long great tradition of English prose stylists, starting with Hooker and Bacon, came to an end. Though the 20th century can boast a very large number of competent prose writers from Lytton Strachey to Bertrand Russell and J.B. Priestley, yet none of them is comparable in stature with the old masters like Browne, Swift, Lamb, Carlyle, and Ruskin. Page 383. Modern prose writers have hardly any style, for they use language only functionally, not like prose poets or orators. Take almost any passage from the essays of Bacon or of Lamb and ask even a dull student to identify it, and 100 to 1 he will do so correctly. But modern prose writers write almost alike, with few personal whimsies and little individualities. Stop. Para. One important reason for this loss of style is the merger of the essayist with the journalist. In this era of mass media, a journalist may retain the individuality and independence of his mind, but when it comes to style, he has to accept the common norms of the written language for the sake of effective communication. Many of the notable essayists of the 20th century have been editors of newspapers or journals, and some of them journalists. This is significant. According to A.C. Ward, the enlistment of essayists by newspapers has had the following two effects. 1. First, it has raised the standard of journalistic prose. 2. And second, it has compelled the essayists to accept a discipline which was quite irksome but useful insofar as it trained them to write regularly, to fill a predetermined space in an organ. The periodical essay of Steele and Addison, which was born with the 18th century and died with it, had a new avatar, under widely different circumstances in the 20th. Section, the prominent essayists of the century. G.K. Chesterton, 1874 to 1936. Chesterton was foremost among the English essayists of early years of the 20th century. He was not an essayist but a phenomenon. Chestertonian wit is not less known than Shavian, Shavian wit. Chesterton and Bernard Shaw were very different ideologically and even physically. Shaw was an agnostic and a socialist, whereas Chesterton was a Roman Catholic and a distributist, unquote, that is, one who was against state control of property and wanted it to be distributed equitably among deserving individuals, bracket close stop. Shaw was very lean, whereas Chesterton was very corpulent. It is said that once Chesterton taunted Shaw for his hollow looks, saying, quote, Mr. Shaw, if some foreigner looked at you, he would think there is a terrible famine in England, unquote, stop. Shaw retorted at once, quote, and if he looked at you, he would also understand the cause of the famine, unquote, stop. For once, Chesterton was crestfallen. Para. Chesterton was always ready to measure swords with whoever came his way. Basically, he was a polemicist, vigorous and incisively witty. He started his career as a journalist writing weekly articles for newspapers. He made his mark with the contributions to the Daily News. As an essayist, he has a tremendous range, and he has always something original and startling to say about everything. Witticisms, epigrams, satiric sallies, and ingenious paradoxes are recurring features of his prose. As an example of paradox, consider his remark about the French Revolution, quote, the greatest event in English history occurred outside England, unquote, stop. How odd, but how true, exclamation. Chesterton's predilection for paradox, however, can at times become as fatal as Cleopatra, as Shakespeare's weakness for puns. As Watt puts it, quote, verbal acrobatics became a pernicious habit, unquote, with him with the passage of time. Watt finds fault, for example, with Chesterton's description of Thomas Hardy as, quote, the village atheist brooding and blaspheming over the village idiot, unquote. This is an example of what Watt calls Chesterton's, quote, verbal exhibitionism, stop, unquote. However, Chesterton's writing happily abounds in such sparkling examples of verbal wit as the following, which attacks Tolstoy's pacifism. Quote, in the pacifist mythology of Tolstoy and his followers, St. George did not conquer the dragon, semicolon. He tied a pink ribbon round its neck and gave it a saucer of milk, stop, unquote. Para. Hilaire, H-E-L-A-I-R-E, Belloc, B-E-L-L-O-C, 1870 to 1953. Belloc was a very close friend and collaborator of Chesterton. Their mutual association was so strong that the two were jokingly named together, quote, the Chester Belloc, unquote, as if they were a single but double-headed creature. The two subscribed to the same religion, Roman Catholicism, and the same political ideology, distributism. Quote, the Chester Belloc, unquote, fought a long battle with agnostic socialists like A.G. Wells and Bernard Shaw. Para. Belloc was an extremely versatile writer, essayist, novelist, poet historian, and biographer. Now he is chiefly read for his books of light verse, A Bad Child, Book of Biz, and More Biz for Worse Children. As an essayist, he has a clear and lucid style laced with humor and charges with polemic energy. He hated to fake an emotion. This makes his essays sincere and sometimes moving. He prided himself for one quality, what he called the, quote, sense of rhythm, comma, unquote, page 384, which is apparent especially in his longer sentences, which seem to have been crafted like a piece of music without any overt effort. However, he lacks Chestertonian brilliance. E. V. Lucas Eleusis, 1868 to 1938. Lucas may be called the Charles Lamb of the 20th century. His adoration of, quote, the Prince of English Essays, unquote, goaded him to write the authoritative Life of Charles Lamb, 1905, and edit a definitive edition of the Works and Letters of Charles and Mary Lamb, 1903 to 1905. In addition, he wrote essays, travel books, books about paintings, and several volumes of what he called, quote, entertainments, unquote. Curious mixtures of the essay and the novel. He also worked with several newspapers before becoming assistant editor of Punch. Lucas's essays and entertainments are full of common sense and humor of a kind often reminiscent of Lamb. But as Ward observes, quote, there are profound dissimilarities between the two writers. The robust urbanity and sophistication of Lucas made him unlike Lamb, ... Lucas' essays and entertainments are marked by fancy, literary artifice, common sense, and humor. Yet his humor, though in general kindly, is sometimes savage. Stop, unquote. Para. A. G. Gardiner, 1865 to 1946. Gardiner, or, quote, Alpha of the Plough, unquote, was also a journalist as well as an essayist of note. He was editor of the Daily News from 1902 to 1919, a paper to which Chesterton made regular contributions in his early career as an essayist. Gardiner has probably a better claim than Lucas to the mantle of Elia, as he is closer to the peculiar temper of the great romantic essayist. Gardiner could write on almost everything that came his way: umbrellas, pigs, pockets, beer, or porcelain. His prose is close to everyday language, clear, informal, genial, and energetic. He avoids difficult words. In fact, he has written an essay, quote, on big words, unquote, to justify his choice of simple and common diction. He distinguishes between what he calls, quote, a fine use of words, unquote, and, quote, the use of fine words, unquote, comma, and prefers the former to the latter. Robert Lind, 1879 to 1949. Yet another journalist essayist, Lind, as, quote, Y, unquote, wrote weekly essays for New Statesman for a number of years. Like Chesterton, he brooded over his articles in a Fleet Street cafe, letting the grateful fumes of coffee kindle his imagination. His essays are marked by geniality, infectious humor, subjectivity, and an uncanny penchant for the right, telling phrase. Watt says about him, quote, he was a skilled phrase maker and could describe a cup final, Battle of Footerloo, Footrloo, bracket closed, unquote, with his eye on many things besides the game, or on everything except the game. And few funnier things have been written than, quote, eggs, and Easter homily, unquote, stop. Lind was the last great personal essayist in the line of Lamb and Stevenson, For with the onset of World War II, 1939 to 45, and the concomitant paper famine, newspapers could not spare any space for light stuff. Thus, the vogue of the personal essay came to an end with Lind. Max Beerbohm, 1872 to 1856. Beerbohm was a cartoonist and caricaturist as well as a prose writer. He became the dramatic critic of the Saturday Review when Shaw retired in 1898. He had a rare gift for parody. A Christmas Garland, his best-known work, consists of 17 essays on the subject of Christmas, each of them parodying the style of a contemporary author, Conrad, Bennett, Shaw, and others. As an essayist, he is relaxed and good-humored. He is a good satirist as well. Ward describes him as a, quote, a philosophic jester, bursting as well, stop. Ward describes him as, quote, a philosophic jester, bursting bubbles, quote, a philosophic jester bursting bubbles of snobbery and pretense with Wheaton irony and satire, unquote, stop. He holds a prominent place among essayists of the 20th century because, to quote Ward, he was, quote, completely original, unquote, stop. Scientific essayists Bertrand Russell, 1872 to 1970, Aldous Huxley, 1894 to 1963, and J.B.S. Halden, 1892 to 1964. These writers either wrote essays on scientific subjects or else wrote scientifically, that is, dispassionately and rationally, on issues concerning practical life. Russell was a notable philosopher and mathematician and a campaigner for rationalism. Huxley, who was a novelist as well, campaigned against mass culture and unreasonable opinions like the one that the Taj is a very artistic building. Halden, a geneticist, wrote about difficult scientific subjects in a simple, lucid style. In fact, the style of all scientific essays is clear and purely functional, though Huxley, unlike others, can be very witty and sarcastic.